I'm Brett Perlman, President of the Center for Houston's Future, and welcome to this year's Houston Low Carbon Energy Summit. This year, we've called our summit an Innovation Summit because Bill Gates famously said that we need an innovation revolution in order to solve climate change. And today, we have a great program that's going to look at what needs to occur in terms of innovation in a couple of different market segments in Houston to achieve that low carbon energy future that we've been talking about. We'll explore these opportunities in a study that we did with the University of Houston on what these opportunities are. We'll then hear from corporate and community leaders about what they are doing to facilitate that transition. And finally today, we'll close with a really interesting discussion from two exceptional nationally known figures, Jules Court-Norris from the Rocky Mountain Institute. Many of you who were at our conference last year know that we had Amory Lovins, who is the founder of the Rocky Mountain Institute. So Rocky Mountain Institute has been our partner on this conference now for a second year. And we'll be joined by Amy Jaffe, who many of you know from the Baker Institute. And they will be talking about what we need to do to accelerate the pace of the energy transition and what we need to do to up our game. So I think we have a really exciting day for you today. This will be a very fast-paced conference. We've allowed for just 5-minute breaks between, so stay tuned. Hopefully you'll be able to be with us for the whole time until 1:30. I want to mention that this is only the first half of the conference. The second half of the conference will be a week from today, and we'll be looking at the other half of the coin in terms of energy innovation, and that is what we need to do to become to create an energy innovation ecosystem in Houston. And if you haven't signed up for that conference, please do. I think it'll be a really interesting day. Talking about what's happened at universities in our accelerators and incubators with the venture capital and finance community, and then some foundations and what we're calling facilitators. And we'll end the day with a very interesting keynote from Franklin Diaz-Chang, who flew more shuttle missions than anyone else and is now working both on a mission to Mars, a manned mission to Mars, and on solving climate change, two of these grand challenges. So without further ado, I'd like to kick off our conference by introducing our morning keynote. We have Jason Klein and Marcella Burke for what I think will be a really interesting discussion on what's going on climate change and what's going on in Houston. Jason is the Chief of Staff and Vice President for Energy Transition Strategy at Shell. And he has a massive job of assessing risks and opportunities across Shell's U.S. businesses, developing advocacy and policy positions around the energy transition, and implementing long-term strategies to make Shell resilient to expected changes in the energy system. Marcella is the head of the energy transition practice at King and Spalding, where her practice focuses on environmental enforcement, compliance, incident response, and environmental regulatory aspects of sustainable projects and investments. She previously served in several senior government positions at the Department of Interior and the Environmental Protection Agency. And so I'm very pleased to invite both Marcella and Jason to the conference. Marcella, take it away.
Brett, thank you so much for hosting us this morning and for hosting this entire event, which is very important, especially in the city of Houston, to be having this conversation. So thank you for your leadership. Jason, want to kick off this conversation from last year's summit. So last year at this very summit, you set off a very interesting debate, which also played out in the Houston Chronicle, when you said that many energy executives in Houston were actually afraid to publicly discuss climate change. And if we don't embrace the issue that many young people and top talent wouldn't be attracted to Houston or to the energy industry. We thought you might appreciate an opportunity to expound on that. We'd love to hear whether that is how you still feel today.
Thank you, Marcella. It's a pleasure to be here. I apologize, we're having some system issues despite all the good work we've done to get the system to work. So my camera's not allowing me to come on, but we'll hopefully get that worked out in a second. I do remember having that conversation and saying that, Houston has a problem if we can't discuss climate change openly. Hopefully, there we go with the camera. I honestly can't believe that was only a year ago. And when we talked to Brett about this, I thought, well, certainly that's been at least 2 years, because so much has happened since we had that conversation. But in fact, it was just last summer. And if I think about some of the changes that have happened since then, a couple that I want to point out. I was really excited back in February to attend the release of the Resilient Houston Plan, which I think is really important in setting up how we are resilient to climate change, how we're resilient to changes in the demographics of the city, how we're resilient to flooding and everything else. And it's kind of a roadmap of how we remain a global energy hub and the energy capital of the world. Earlier this summer on Earth Day, the mayor launched the city's first climate action plan, which dovetails really well with the Resilient Houston strategy. And we held our first climate week, although to some irony, we had to reschedule it due to a hurricane. And we've also seen a lot of movement around establishing Houston as a hub for innovation. And I know that's going to be a big topic over the course of this event, but we broke ground on the ION in the South Main Innovation District. We announced Greentown Labs, which is America's largest clean tech incubator, is opening their second incubator here in Houston. Shell announced our investment in Rice's Carbon Hub, and there's a lot of others. So in that innovation space. So I think there's been a real advancement on what it's going to take for Houston to remain the energy capital of the world. And I'm encouraged as a Houstonian with the progress we've made over the last year.
So there's been public skepticism that fossil fuel-based energy companies, including Shell, have announced aggressive climate goals, yes, but that they're actually not planning to transform their business models to lower their carbon footprint. So let's talk about Shell's own goals. What does Shell mean when it says it'd like to achieve net zero carbon emissions by 2050? And how does Shell plan to address CO2 emissions from its gasoline and other retail products, those so-called Scope 3 emissions?
Yeah, so I think that's a fair challenge, and I'm happy to address it. So first I'd say, we've been a willing and able partner and player in the energy transition. We see commercial opportunities here in participating in the global drive to provide more and cleaner energy solutions, which is our purpose. Shell's been around for over a century, and we've adapted to changes in the system over the last 100 years, and will continue to adapt and thrive and remain relevant. In terms of our specific ambitions and commitments, so back in 2017, we announced our net carbon footprint ambition, which looked at how we reduce the carbon intensity of the energy products we sell. And those targets set us on a path to comply with society's progress towards meeting the goals of the Paris Agreement, kind of a 2-degree pathway, if you will. In April of this year, we announced that we were accelerating those ambitions to align more with a 1.5 degree world, so 1.5 degrees Celsius of warming since the industrial age. And as part of that, we announced our ambition to be a net zero energy company by 2050. But it's important to say, we're not just setting targets for 2035 and 2050 and giving it a we'll wait and see attitude. We are setting short-term benchmarks as well. So using 2016 as a starting point, Shell's already achieved a 3% reduction in our net carbon footprint and have targeted 4% by 2022, and we'll keep setting interim targets year by year to get there. Getting to be a net zero company, though, is really about aligning with society and moving with society in 3 ways. So first, we've got to be net zero on our own emissions from the manufacture of our products by 2050 or sooner. And that is our Scope 1 emissions, really. And that's about reducing the carbon intensity, fugitive methane emissions. It's also potentially looking at carbon capture and storage on our assets and other ways to offset those remaining emissions. Secondly, we aim to reduce the carbon intensity or net carbon footprint of the energy products we sell by 65% by 2050. How will we do that? By selling more natural gas in our portfolio, a lot more renewable power as part of our energy mix, more biofuels and hydrogen. And I know hydrogen is going to be a subject of a number of conversations today. And third, we're going to work with our customers to help them decarbonize. And we see a real role for building coalitions of businesses, governments, academia, and other parties to identify sector by sector decarbonization pathways, because Shell alone is not going to solve the aviation decarbonization challenge. We're going to have to partner with airlines and airports and infrastructure players and governments around policy to help decarbonize that sector. That's a really tough one, and it's one of many of these hard sectors that we have to work with collaboratively across all the people in this room to kind of challenge. And I guess the final caution though I give is, our business plans today will not get us where we want to be. Our business plans are going to have to change over time as societies and customers change as well.
Thanks so much. So let's talk about another debate that's been afoot, which is equating low carbon with 100% non-fossil energy. Do you endorse that dichotomy?
No, I think that's a false dichotomy, and even the Paris Agreement doesn't call for no fossil fuels. The Paris Agreement doesn't say zero emissions. It calls for net zero emissions. So yes, renewable power is going to have to grow substantially, and the amount of things that are electrified is going to have to grow substantially, because renewables chiefly produce electricity, and for that to have a big impact, the things that use electricity will need to be expanded. Right now, only about 20% of final energy use is in the form of electricity. And we've also got to look at these hard to abate sectors like steel and cement and iron and chemicals that really benefit from the portability and the energy density and the intense heat that can be derived from fossil fuels or from molecules, and there aren't readily available or currently economic pathways to electrify that. We've published our sky scenario, which shows a technologically and economically possible, but nonetheless challenging pathway for society to achieve the goals of the Paris Agreement over the next 50 years. And it shows that, 50 years out, fossil fuels still represent 20% of the global energy mix. And mind you, that's an energy system that's twice as big as the one we are today. And it's not just Shell scenarios. If you look at the IEA scenarios, if you look at the IPCC scenarios, all of which show Paris compliant futures, they all feature a big role for fossil fuels going forward.
So in addition to climate change, we have to talk about access to low cost energy as a foundation for economic growth. This, of course, is another goal of Paris. Fossil fuels lift billions of people out of poverty every day. So can energy companies be the same force for accomplishing environmental goals and maintaining an inexpensive, reliable source of energy to not only the global economy, but in particular to the underprivileged? How do we meet these competing goals?
Yeah, so they are two of the main goals of the Paris Agreement. The Paris Agreement was built around the Sustainable Development Goals, and two of them that worth noting. One is no poverty. The Paris Agreement is often spoken about as a climate change agreement, but that's just one element. So there's 10 billion people that are expected to inhabit this planet over the next 50 years, and the Paris Agreement says we have to give them all a decent quality of life. Another one of those Sustainable Development Goals is clean energy, and these are some important words here. It's access to affordable, reliable, sustainable, and modern energy for everyone, and to help eradicate poverty. So universal energy access is really fundamental to our core purpose of providing more and cleaner energy. And we recognize that the solutions that might be suitable for here in the United States might not be suitable for other parts of the world. In 2018, we set out an ambition to deliver reliable electricity supply to 100 million people, primarily in Africa and Asia, that don't have access to reliable electricity today by 2030. Now, some of that will come in the form of, new innovations and off-grid, distributed microgrids, where, it doesn't involve as much big infrastructure, but we can learn to develop and scale these microgrids and distributed solutions. There's also a big role for natural gas to play here. And in America, with our abundance of natural gas, really has a key role to play. Natural gas can displace coal-fired power generation and displace not only existing, but newly proposed coal-fired generation in a lot of developing economies, and help provide that reliable base load to underpin growth in the developing world. But I would caution, we as the natural gas industry really need to be good stewards of our business, and managing fugitive emissions is something we've got to tackle, and it's going to be really critical in protecting the role of natural gas as a transition fuel.
So Houston is the energy capital of the world, and we would like to see it maintain its position as such. You and I are both native Houstonians, so we're a little biased here, but if the energy transition is going to happen anywhere and succeed anywhere, it has to be here. So what are Houston's strengths and weaknesses in becoming a hub for low carbon energy transition? What needs improvement?
Well, so let's start with the good stuff. Let's start about the strengths. I think our city's diversity, our arts community, our talent base, really stand out. And as the saying goes, if you want to know what America is going to look like in 30 years, just come to Houston, because we're already there. I think that, we're a hub of heavy industry. We've got, the major Port of Houston, we have the airports and road freight. We have world-class universities, which you're going to hear from later today. We've got a plethora of engineering talent and a lot of know-how around energy and infrastructure. And we have a willing public that wants to be part of this. So we have all the right players here to make a difference in the energy transition. And I do think that distinguishes Houston from just about any other place in the US and possibly in the world. So what works against us? I don't think we get enough credit outside of Houston for the rich culture that exists in our town, or the quality of life that we all have. It's like, everyone says, no one really wants to move to Houston, but once they come here, you can't get them to leave. We're probably more known for our traffic and our sprawl. So I think there's a reputation piece there we've got to manage. And I kind of couch it as, I'm thrilled that Tesla decided if you're going to build trucks, you got to do it in Texas, but, I'd rather they be building it here than in Austin. And we got to work on that next time. I do think Houstonians are really good at being competitive. Collaboration may not be our first instinct, and I think we got to get better at it. I think we are getting better. We've seen a lot about collaboration in the innovation space around, what's going on in the South Main Innovation District, and we're starting to see some of the universities collaborate. We're going to have a great panel later with, people from A&M, Prairie View, UT, U of H, and Rice. And, it's rare to get all these people together. And I think we got to do more of it. So we've got the experts, we've got the knowledge and the know-how and the can-do attitude. I think we've got to work on getting the right market and policy signals so that we can get people to invest here for the next generation of fuels infrastructure, and making sure that people see Houston as a real natural place to invest.
So Shell, a large presence here in Houston, has already worked with this center to play an important role in climate adaptation with Shell's $1.8 million donation to the 100 Resilient Cities program. Can you talk about that program for those who are unaware, and also talk about the role Shell will play making Houston the hub for low carbon energy?
Yeah, so look, Houston's our U.S. headquarters. It's really important to us that it remains a place where we can attract and retain the talent we need to thrive through the energy transition. So we are really proud to have partnered with the city on entering the Resilient Cities Network and developing the Resilient Houston strategy, which, as I said, dovetails really well with the Climate Action Plan and lays out a roadmap of how Houston can address both short-term shocks like hurricanes and floods, and long-term stresses around education, access, and poverty, and some of the bigger challenges that we need to face. Shell will continue to engage in other places. We're a founding member of Evolve Houston, which is looking at how we bring more EVs into Houston, how we promote the adoption of EVs and the infrastructure necessary to make that happen. We'll continue to make investments like we have around the Carbon Hub at Rice University. And we were a founding member of Greentown Labs when they opened in Boston. I was thrilled to be there when we opened the wet lab just outside of Boston. But I was a lot more proud when we announced that we were going to be a founding partner of Greentown Labs as they expand here in Houston, and just right across the street from the Ion. So we're really excited to be a good corporate citizen in Houston. It's really important to us, and we'll continue to look at how we can bring together different parts of the community and collaborate and work towards common goals.
So Jason, what about your role? What does it mean that Shell created a position such as yours? It's obviously not a symbolic gesture. You are very involved in the community in all these very important ways. So the company is doing something. What is Shell doing through your role? Can you talk about that?
Yeah, so one of Shell's 3 strategic priorities is to thrive through the energy transition, but we very clearly recognize that the energy transition is not one uniform thing. It's absolutely playing out differently in different parts of the world. So what we're seeing in Europe is very different from what we see in China. Here in the US, it's even more complex because what we see in Texas and Louisiana is different than what we see in California or in the Northeast. So, my role and roles like mine around the world are trying to understand how does the energy transition look like it's going to play out in different parts of the world? What can we do to influence the outcome? How can we adapt our businesses to take advantage and find commercial opportunities and thrive through the conditions we see on the ground, which are very, very local. And so, we will continue to evolve and think about how we engage differently. And I'm excited in the US that although it is a patchwork of different energy transitions, we see opportunities in all of them. We see opportunities in California where we build out a lot of exciting new fuels infrastructure. We see opportunities on the Gulf Coast where CCS kind of really has to work. If it works anywhere, it's going to work in the Gulf Coast. And we see opportunities in the Northeast with our offshore wind projects where there's a big demand for offshore wind. So we're really excited about the commercial opportunities here.
Okay, great. Well, it looks like we might have time for one more question here. Given that the goal is net zero by 2050, what needs to happen over the next 10 years in order to achieve such a long-term carbon reduction goal? I've always loved the saying that winning slowly is like losing. So the game is going to be played in the next 10 years. How do you see that playing out?
So the next 10 years are critical. I think that there will be winners in 10 years' time in cities and sector hubs that really take action now. We just published, as a result of kind of the world we live in, some new scenarios a couple of weeks ago called Rethinking the 2020s. And it looks at 3 different ways the world may come out of the COVID crisis that we're in, depending on whether people prioritize wealth and economy or health or security. And it's worth digging into those, and they're on our website. But I would say that the next 10 years, some cities are going to look at how they rebuild stronger. They're going to look at how they build more resilient economies and how they look to embrace things like CCS and hydrogen and EVs. And we'll look to come out of this decade, the 2020s, stronger as a result of this rather than weaker. But you got to look at policies as well. We need good policies to support technology development. We need collaboration to commercialize and scale these things up, and we need consumers and businesses to work with us to take these things through beyond pilot stage and really scale them up. And the next 10 years are critical. I think, if we can build the CCS and hydrogen and EV hubs here in Houston in the next 10 years, we'll win. We'll be a hub for growth and prosperity. And that's where, hopefully this week, we'll energize some of those conversations.
Wonderful. Well, Jason, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you, Marcella. I really appreciate it.
And what a great conversation. Thank you guys for doing this. I was remiss in my introduction. I meant to say that today is National Hydrogen Day. You may not know that, but the atomic weight of hydrogen is 1.008. So sometimes it's better to be lucky than good when you have your conference. We didn't know we were scheduling it on National Hydrogen Day when we did, but our next panel is going to talk a lot about hydrogen. And I think it'll be a really interesting discussion because there's a huge opportunity in hydrogen, I think, in Houston. And Jason, thanks so much for mentioning that. And thanks for all the work that you're doing at Shell. And Marcella, thanks for the support that you're giving the center. We've really enjoyed working with you on this and having King and Spalding involved with our board. So I really want to just thank you guys for kicking us off. It was a great conversation. To the audience, the way this is going to work, we're going to take a 5-minute break, only 5 minutes, and then we're going to come back for what I think will be a really interesting headline-making event, which is the announcement of our study that we did with University of Houston and KPMG, which is going to show you the areas in which we think Houston can excel in the low carbon energy future. So stay tuned. We'll be back right at 9:30 to start that discussion. Marcella and Jason, thanks so much. I hope you can stick around if you have time later in the conference. Bye now.
Okay.